USCHO.com.
Welcome to USCHO Edge for Friday, November 3rd, 2023. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly and Dan Rubin. We're going to do something a little bit different this week, and that is looking at team futures to win the Frozen Four in 2024. And first of all, Jim, why don't you give us a quick primer on what futures are?
So a future is exactly what it sounds like. It's a future bet. You are betting on the fate of a team throughout the season, basically. And these odds change all the time. And I think the number one thing I'm going to say throughout this podcast is shop for the best odds. If you know you want to make a bet, shop for the best odds. So we'll get into that a little bit later, but odds on futures change all the time. But, right now you can go in and bet, hey, Michigan or Minnesota or Boston College or AIC, whoever you want, is going to win the national championship. I am going to put down X amount of money, in the casino, the sports book, whatever it is, will tell you what the line is that you would win. So right now, I'm just going to give an example, and we're going to kind of have to couch a lot of things that we say here before I say them. But if you can get odds with all of the NCAA Division I eligible teams on them, which would be, I think that's 62 teams.
64, but I guess a couple won't be eligible.
So you won't have odds on those. 60, I think it's 62 teams. And if you have all of those teams in there, the favorite right now is a two-way tie between Boston College at 7-1 or plus 700 and Minnesota at 7-1 or plus 700. So that means if you were to bet $100 today, and Boston College, say, Boston College wins the national championship, then minutes after the national championship game, you will be eligible to collect on that ticket, and you would collect $800, the $100 you originally bet plus $700. So let's give you a wider example where you might see some real value. Former national champion Minnesota Duluth, they're plus 3,000. So that means if you were to bet $100, you would win $3,100 if they were to win the national championship. So it's an interesting way of betting if you have a favorite team, if you have a hunch, whatever it might be that this team could win a national championship, you put some money on it. The one thing I always caution with this is that you are tying up money, and if you have a restricted gambling budget, you don't necessarily want to bet a ton of money on futures. And we'll get into this a little bit down the road here in this podcast, how you can maybe make smaller bets, parlay them with other futures, and then maybe find a way to cash a bigger ticket without having to tie up $100 or $1,000 to get any value on your bet. So that's kind of the short way of saying, what a future is. And now I think we can jump into what some of the futures look like right now. But I will say, this is another thing that we have to kind of caution. A lot of rules out there when it comes to the modern day sports gambling. It used to be in Vegas. If there was odds out there, they were there. Right now, if say you're betting in Massachusetts, you're not allowed to take the futures on any team in Massachusetts. So, two of the favorites, Boston College and Boston University, wouldn't be available to bet on, say, the DraftKings app in Massachusetts. Same thing goes for the state of New York. You're not allowed to bet on, say, Cornell or RIT, Colgate, St. Lawrence, Clarkson. They're not going to be available. So when you have books that don't have certain teams included, the odds on the remaining teams are going to be shorter. So I just told you the plus 700 on Boston College in Minnesota. Well, Minnesota here in Massachusetts is plus 600. That's why I say shop it around. If you're going to be betting a future, think about where you can bet it. If you can bet it in Las Vegas, if you're heading to Las Vegas, if it's available in, say, Atlantic City, if you're taking a trip somewhere and you're in a state that has sports gambling but doesn't really have a college hockey team or doesn't have the weird rules that you can't bet on those local teams, that's the place to put those bets because you will be getting better odds.
And I should note that in order to get the total odds for everything for across the country, I had to use my VPN and log in through Canada. So that was the only way that I could see that. There's some people who cleaned up on Wednesday night for the Texas Rangers, just by example.
Right.
They were a plus 6,000 in the futures as recently as August. So some people did very well there to have a wild card team come in and win the World Series.
Yeah, and that was kind of one of the things that I know I wanted to pull back on was on the or pull back the curtain on is when you're looking at futures betting. When you look at the teams that are the best odds, you're if they're a juggernaut, that's one thing. But bear in mind that when we get into the tournament in college hockey, even a juggernaut can lose, and a juggernaut can lose. All they have to do is play one bad game against a wrong opponent, and that's where the odds kind of come in. If you were to go back to the All-Star break or just before the All-Star break in Major League Baseball, and that's where the World Series just wrapped up. That's kind of what makes it the most recent one to use as an example. You'd have gotten really short odds plus 500 on the Atlanta Braves. You'd have gotten plus 1,000 on the Mets and the Yankees. Mets and the Yankees fell apart. So if you were looking at the Yankees saying, or the Mets saying, well, the Mets spent all this money, there's no way they can be this bad, like the San Diego Padres, same idea. You really have to, if you're going to tie up a future bet now, you might look at Boston College and say, well, Boston College is rolling. I mean, look how good they are. But that's where, if you're betting on a favorite team, then that's one thing. But you really want to shop around and get your best odds and find a team that you really believe will be good the whole year and not just be a shot right now. Who do you believe in? What do the performances tell you? This isn't just a one per week. Hey, is this the right matchup? You really want to look at your teams and say, are these hiccups bad hiccups and warning signs? Or, do I think a team that's playing well right now is really that good? And that's where the odds will level off for you when you shop around.
Well, let's take a look at some of the top favorites to win the NCAA Frozen Four in 2024. The usual suspects are at the top of the list.
I think you could say so. And this is, the list that includes all the teams. BC, Minnesota, I mentioned plus 700. Boston University, Michigan, they're both plus 800. Denver plus 1,000. Quinnipiac to repeat would be plus 1,200. Interesting. Here's one that I found actually interesting. Penn State plus 1,800. They're starting to gain more credibility. I actually was following them last year, and they started the season, I believe, plus 5,000. And as the season went on, they slowly went down to, I think they ended up finishing as they finished the postseason. I think they were somewhere around plus 1,200. But here we are really early in the season, and the bookmakers already kind of have Penn State circled as one of those teams, plus 1,800. You then get into teams like Western Michigan, North Dakota, St. Cloud State, all plus 2,000. Ohio State, Notre Dame, and Harvard are all plus 2,500. I tend to love experience in the NCAA tournament, so I'm always looking for value down the line when I'm talking about future bets. Something that it's going to pay at least plus 3,000. And I mentioned earlier Minnesota, Duluth, Providence, another team that's won a national championship, UMass. All those teams happen to be plus 3,000 right now. I don't know if I could go that much further down and find a recent champion. Obviously, Cornell has won a national championship. Maine has won a national championship. Cornell's at plus 4,000. Maine plus 7,500. It's all whether you're willing to roll the dice on a team that we know has some ability. I think Maine might have been picked ninth by the Hockey's coaches, but they've come out of the gate really strong. Do you want to drop $100 or even $50 on Maine right now to potentially win over more than $3,000 on a $50 bet? Those are some of the long shot odds that I tend to look for in futures. I don't love ever betting that favorite, 700 right now for BC or Minnesota. Sure, could they roll? I think Minnesota is a very worthy team, having just been to the national championship game and lost. And we've seen in recent years the trend of getting to the finals, losing, and then coming back and winning a year later. I know Minnesota Duluth did that. UMass did that. So it's something that you can kind of keep that in the back of your head as well. But Dan, what stands out to you at this point?
I think when you look at some of the futures that are out there, I think you're right. I think also think that some of the short odds, some of the favorites that are here are teams that carry reputationally big names in the hockey community. A lot of people, or Minnesota is always going to start the season with better odds than a lot of teams just because it's Minnesota. Whether or not Minnesota is having a down year or an up year, those are teams that the bookmakers in the very beginning are always going to believe in. And that goes back to something that I always say. And when you look at the preseason poll, it usually reflects that, no one's going to put Minnesota below a certain mark just because they're Minnesota. It's the Notre Dame football theory. Every year you're going to turn on the poll in the first week of the season and see Notre Dame ranked somewhere until there's too many weeks in a row that they've dropped. So I think early in the season, the favorites are going to be a lot of teams that a lot of people just know, like that's and expect to be in the tournament. It's where Denver's in there, the defending national champion, and Quinnipiac's always going to be in there. Now they're always going to be in there to win the national championship as better odds, but where they won it last year, that's where their odds maybe shrink. To me, and there are teams that have started to slip down that I think are undervalued in general because they haven't won anything in a while. So the odds makers aren't really looking at them. And that's a team, like a Wisconsin right now that you're looking at and seeing plus 3,000 and seeing, like I said, do you believe that the 7-1 start at this point is indicative of an immediate run, knowing if you're following college hockey, and you're following us, what we've talked about with Mike Hastings, with the transfer portal, with bringing some of those guys over from Minnesota State. What Minnesota State did the last few years it was phenomenal. So are you looking at Wisconsin and saying, well, look, we know that team could compete. So is that something to believe in? It's the same idea with, a team like, I don't know, like if I were to pick one, Merrimack, we know that they were doing well last year. We know that they were, a team that's coming out and has something that's building. We know that they're a team that no one's really going to look at and as a favorite because they don't carry the name value. So at plus 5,000, are you looking at them and saying, hey, I think Merrimack had something special or can do something special out of Hockey East, which is a good one. But for me, the longest odds I think I would probably take a shot on is UNH right now. And that's if you, again, believe that UNH has come out and done something that is going to continue. It goes back to what I said last year about UConn when I was voting UConn number one in the country. I didn't think UConn was going to be there at the end. I didn't think UConn was going to be the best team in the country last year, win the national championship. But at that moment in time, I believed UConn was the best team in the country the way they were playing. So that's why I put them at number one. That doesn't mean I want to take a future bet on UConn to win the national championship. And those are the things that you have to look at when you look at the odds. How does it reflect what you believe? And then you get into the long shot odds, the plus 30,000, where if one of those teams wins the national championship, then, or whatever it was, 3,000, was it 30,000 that's 30, down there at the bottom? 30,000. I'll tell you right now.
Probably there's more than 24 teams at 30,000.
But I'm telling you right now that if we wind up with an RPI Lake Superior National Championship, there's a meteor heading towards us on the gambling community. There is a meteor and the dinosaurs are going to die again.
I want to ask you some more about what you said. We're going to take a quick pause and we'll be back with more of USCHO Edge. We're back with USCHO Edge. Dan brought up Wisconsin. Wisconsin sitting at plus 3,000 right now. I wish I could go back 3 weeks and see what the number looked like at the beginning of the season were it available. It seems to me that 3,000 is a quick moving up for Wisconsin when they're right in the midst of teams like Harvard and Providence and Northeastern and Minnesota State, Minnesota Duluth, all teams that have been in the conversation the last couple of years. Is this a historical thing for Wisconsin, or do you think we've got something here reflecting that really quick 7-1 start?
We're seeing a change. If I remember right, I had looked at them and they were, I believe, plus 15,000 at one point not too long ago. And that's not surprising. because historically they haven't been a strong team. If somebody took them at plus 15,000, good for you. You had some inside knowledge of what Mike Hastings was going to do, but now they're down to plus 3,000. Not that lacks value. That's still a heck of a value. But yeah, this will continue to move. And if Wisconsin starts putting together a few losses, they'll probably go back up to plus 5,000. If they put together more wins, they might get as low as plus 1,000 or plus 1,200. So that is kind of where that's how quickly this moves. If you look at it every Monday morning, you can see some shifts in what the odds makers are doing. I like to use the same book every time. I only go to DraftKings for this, and the simplification doing that is just that I can make apples to apples comparisons. I don't want to go out and shop the national champion and say, well, okay, what is it at Caesars? What is it at MGM? What is it at the Superbook or Circa or something like that in Vegas? So if I had the access to all that and had knew the casino operators and the sportsbook operators could email me the odds every Monday morning, I'd make more comparisons. So I keep it simple right now. But this is always something, despite the fact I don't bet on hockey. I follow this one. I love following the odds throughout the year. I know that Quinnipiac at one point last year was plus 3,000 or higher. And they won the national championship. And don't forget that the other thing too with this is that on the Sunday of Selection Sunday, all new odds come out just for the 16 teams that are remaining. And you'll see some big shifts and you'll see some really wide odds. I mean, whoever the Atlantic hockey team is every year usually is somewhere around, plus 6,000, plus 5,000. It's not like, you're only going to get a 16-1 in here. You're going to get some really wide odds.
Let me ask you one about, since you brought up Atlantic hockey, everybody except one team is plus 30,000. The one that's plus 15,000 is Air Force. They're not picked all that high in their conference. Is that some of the history that people remember about Air Force and how they've done in the postseason?
Yes. Yes. In a manner of speaking, it's more about, again, when nobody really knows anything about Atlantic hockey teams. Those teams don't have the name recognition across the board. AIC was a nice story going to the tournament, beating St. Cloud, and I think the hockey community understood why that happened. But when we're talking about sports books, they're looking at the history of Atlantic hockey, and there's been only the one Frozen Four appearance, which happened 14 years ago, and the fact that happened was a team that in RIT, sorry Ed, that nobody recognizes, and that's
hey, everywhere I go, people say what's writ, so I know.
Yeah, so. In a manner of college hockey with the pop culture references that come in against the Boston colleges, the Boston universities, and the Miracle on Ice team that everyone knows the movie, and those guys were Boston and Minnesota and the big schools and the ones that are historically always good. Atlantic hockey teams are never going to get that recognition. You're never going to go across the board. And I say this broadcasting for Bentley, which is Bentley as a university is world recognized, but in my own backyard, sometimes there aren't people that say, "Oh, Bentley's a Division I hockey team." What does that mean? Like that's part of the Atlantic Hockey Challenge, right? We could do a whole podcast on what they're doing to gain some of those footholds, and they are. But the problem is that historically, the team that came in and ran the roost was Air Force. So the odds on Air Force are probably going to be better until the champion wins it and goes to the postseason, which, to be fair, the team that wins the postseason may not be who you think it's going to be if you're even betting a future on an Atlantic hockey tournament. So that's where that's where some of these odds get out of whack.
The other thing too, and if you do the same exercise in pro sports, you'll see that you don't have to bet on a champion. You can bet in baseball. You could bet who's going to win the American League, who's going to win the National League. So there's different ways to kind of look at the futures in those leagues. in hockey, the only way to approach is either the national champion or individual game bets. So you don't really think about it. So let's say you want to say that whoever the Atlantic hockey winner is going to reach the Frozen Four. Let's just be hypothetical. Well, you could make probably 2 back-to-back bets where the Atlantic hockey team to win each game straight out is probably going to be around 450. You do that twice, and even bet 450, win it, lay the 550 the next game, and win again at 450 or something like that. Now you're in the 2000s in terms of what you just profited. That's the only way to really talk about like, hey, I think this team's going to reach the Frozen Four. There's no way they're going to win the whole thing, but I think they're going to reach the Frozen Four. You've got to approach that in individual game bets, unfortunately.
Right.
I want to ask you about one more team before we wrap up, and that's Arizona State at plus 4,000 in the same area as UMass Lowell and Cornell. That's some good confidence toward a team that has probably the most difficult path of anybody out there.
Likely. But the only thing with Arizona State, this is the last time we'll be able to say this, they get to design a schedule that can probably get them in if they, win the games they're supposed to win. And I think Greg Powers has been a master at devising that schedule. He hasn't gotten in for a couple of years. They would have made the 2020 tournament. They made the 2019 tournament. But 2021, the struggles of playing the schedule they had to play, and then 2022 and 2023 not making the tournament. They were on a path last year and didn't make it. But you get pretty good odds with them just on the fact that they'll probably make the tournament, but then can they put the 4 wins together? That's one of the hardest things to do. I think that getting the wins together. But there's one other thing I wanted to kind of talk about here. And sometimes if you don't want to risk a ton of money, but you want to make some of these bets, it's building some bets together. So maybe you have 2 or 3 or 4 futures. Like I for example, put together a bet that said, let me take Minnesota to win the national championship in hockey. Let me take Michigan to win the national championship in basketball. Let me take, I think it was one of the teams, maybe it was Michigan, to win the football championship. And let me take the Kansas City Chiefs to win the Super Bowl. That's a lot of wins you got to put together, but you're taking a lot of favorites there as well. And in doing so, I put together a 4-way parlay. All 4 of those have to hit. But for $10, a $10 parlay would have paid out more than $17,000 if all 4 of those hit. So if you're just looking to have some fun with futures, pick some bets that you like, put them together. And the one thing I will tell you about that, the order of operations, the college football championship is probably first, the Super Bowl second, the men's Final Four for basketball is third, and the Frozen Four would be the 4th one of it. If you've got the first 3 legs of that, you can either hedge against it, or I'm going to tell you that any sports book will probably, unless it's a Vegas book, will offer you a buyout. So if you're about to make potentially $17,000 if Minnesota is still alive in the NCAA hockey tournament in that bet that I just described, you're probably going to be offered $3,000 to $4,000 by DraftKings or whoever you make the bet through, just because they don't want to be on the hook for all $17,000.
Yeah, that's a great point. I know that when I read about futures and look at my Monopoly money, that one of the things that I love to play, or when I say play, like play around with in my head or look at odds, is what happens with Major League Baseball. That's always the one that I come back to, because Major League Baseball is a place where you can take shorter odds and parlay it with something. And because of the length of the season and the repetition that's involved, I really believe that there is a path, so to speak, where you can parlay a division winner, or because those are likely going to happen. Like every year in the American League East, until the Red Sox and Yankees figure get their heads out of a body part that I can't mention on a family show. The Tampa Bay Rays are going to be your team that you're going to probably pick with as a favorite to win the division. So if you parlay that opposite team that you feel good about in college hockey, and you hit the college hockey champion, it's going to change the odds. The same way with the parlay does when we talk about games in a given week and you see a heavy favorite, you want to do that. If you can parlay all the favorites, or you can parlay something together and string it together, it makes the year, a little bit interesting, or a little bit more interesting. And like I said, with some of the bets that are out there and with some of the things that are out there, you can really have some fun with it based on who you think or what you want to play with.
One thing I'll leave you with on the before we close here, Ed, these futures are not for sharps. This is not where you're going to find your edge. You're taking a lot of risk. You're tying up money for a bunch of time. It's really for fun, hoping that in October you can pick a national champion in April, or now I guess we're in November. So November you try to pick a national champion for April. I would not tie up tons of money in these things. These are bets that your odds aren't good, but that's why you're getting paid more. I have a lot of fun with them, watching them throughout the season, watching the odds change, advising people that love to take chances. I have plenty of those friends. I love giving the advice. I just don't bet it myself. But I love giving advice on this and then watching the bet throughout the season.
One of my favorite things just to throw in there at the end too is the emotional hedge. Hedge against yourself. Like, you're going to root for a team, so try to win some money if you're hated. Like Minnesota fans, your emotional hedge will be to bet on North Dakota to win the national championship. So this way, if you get knocked out and you're not, like, if you win the national championship, that's great. You get to spend all your money on the merch. But if you see North Dakota there and you have to root against North Dakota and North Dakota wins the national championship, hey, at least you got some money in the end, right?
Yeah, there you go. And we'll keep an eye on this here and there. Probably not whole shows about it, but we'll see how these move and see how the hive mind of bettors has shifted things as things go along. So with that, we'll wrap up our family show about gambling. This has been USCHO Edge. For Dan Rubin, for Jim Connelly, I'm Ed Trefzger, and we'll catch you next week.